Hello, and welcome back. Tonight, we're going to be going over some of the most terrifying ghost stories from around the web. We are currently on Volume 4 of this series. If you enjoy this video, please be sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe. Also, please consider checking out my Patreon, linked in the description, to get ad-free versions of all Fearful Findings videos, along with exclusive behind-the-scenes content and the ability to vote on future video ideas. Now, let's get into the fearful findings. Lesson my two boys taught me a year after they died. In 1989, my two beautiful boys, ages 7 and 9, were playing in the yard when an intoxicated man decided to drive his car, fell asleep, and took their lives. My world changed at that moment. Family drama with shame and blame didn't help, but I made it through the necessary acts to bury my boys. I froze up. I simply froze up. I took a leave of absence from my job as an RN in a hospital, and my supervisor was so understanding and supportive. At home, I had paint and was covered with windows to let no light in, and I sat in darkness for a year, never leaving the house. My friends were wonderful. They fed me. They went shopping and brought me food. I ordered pizza. I sat in the dark, not knowing if it was night or day. My friends never pushed me to do more than I could. They just fed me, visited, brought groceries and items I needed, and let me work myself out of being frozen. A year later, I was watching a talk show one morning. I didn't have cable, so I had to only watch local stations. I was lying on the living room sofa and noticed some sparkling lights up in the corner of the room. I thought it was an electrical fire and sat up quickly to get a better view. It looked like sparklers burning, lots of them. Beautiful white lights growing larger and larger in number until they were about a yard wide and 2 feet tall. A bundle of thousands of white, silver-like sparkles flashing brightly. From this light source, I clearly heard the voices of two men, maybe both upper 20s in age, who were very articulate, well-educated, and professional. They both took turns talking to me very abruptly and sternly, with force, meaning, and impatience. It was like I was being severely reprimanded. In part, they said, "You have been holding us back from very important business we must attend to. We cannot do the work we need to do, which is so important, as you are constantly holding us back. We cannot allow this to continue. You have to let go of us so we can move into our jobs and do the work we are supposed to be doing. Your constant attachment and holding on have stifled our ability to work, and what we need to do is so very important. You just have to let go and let us move on. You are in the way of the great work we are assigned to do." I was being sternly spoken to by my two boys, who now sounded like young executives. The only nice thing they said to me was that one of them said, "We appreciate what you did for us, but now you just have to let us go." I was berated on, like I was in court or in trouble at work in an HR meeting. It was not pleasant, but it got my attention immediately. I replied, "I'm so sorry. I had no idea. Yes, of course I'll let you do what you need to do. I miss you both so much, but I had no idea I was holding you back from what you needed to be doing. It was like being pulled over by the cops and told I did something wrong and I was trying to make it right. I admitted I was holding on to them, but had no idea it was causing them grief from where they are now." Their voices stopped, and the sparkling light diminished in size and brightness to just being a plain corner of the wall. I put my hand on that spot. It felt like a normal wall. I got in the shower, got cleaned up, had to call someone to jump my car as it's not been started in over a year, and drove to my old workplace to put in an application again. My supervisor had moved on. I did a quick interview and got hired again. I started orientation the next day. The encounter with my two boys was a jolt to my system. I went from frozen to thawed quickly. My deep mourning for my sons immediately changed to missing them in a healthy way. There was no thinking about it. The stern talking I got, the lecture, the demand that I let them move on, let me move on, too. Giving them their freedom to do the work they have to do gave me the freedom to do the work I have to do still, too. I enjoyed letting the light back into my house as I slowly started using a razor blade to scrape the paint off the windows. It took months, but it was so healing to turn from darkness to light again. Hospice concepts were coming to America at that time from the UK. I followed up with a local hospice, and soon I was the charge nurse for a 10-bed inpatient unit for terminally ill patients. I was a hospice RN for 17 years, including 5 years as a pediatric hospice nurse. The loss of my children gave me the insight to support others who are transitioning into their next life or career, as I see it now. I had many, many amazing experiences with many of my patients spreading their wings and practicing moving on before and after their deaths. My experience with my boys gave me the strength to support my dying patients and the family and friends they were leaving behind. I've not seen my boys since. I don't want to distract them from the work they need to do. That lecture I got that day was enough. Of course, I think of them so often, never clinging, but now knowing they matured, grew up, and have important work they do that is valuable to them wherever they are, that makes me smile. I hope my story can brighten someone else's day. We go on, there is no end. David Parker. I did an interview about being a hospice RN and some of the spirit encounters I've had, including this story about my boys. I know I'm not allowed to provide the link. It's on YouTube. My late husband and I met in 1990 at the laboratory we both worked for. Neither of us believed in the paranormal, and in fact, we were both atheists. I still am. However, I now believe that our consciousness continues after bodily death. Here's what changed my mind. In 1995, my late husband and I moved into our home in Seattle. The house was built in 1926 and had not been renovated at all, other than the appliances. A few years after we moved in, I decided we should put an exercise room in the huge basement, as our home was too small to put equipment anywhere else. Missing objects. Around that time, I started to notice that things would go missing, and then we would find those things in very weird places. For example, my husband was cooking, and I was in the tub. He came in and asked if I had taken the measuring cup. I had gotten into the bath before he started cooking and had not budged. He said he had it right next to him, and had turned away to do something, but when he turned back, it was gone. I got out of the tub, put my robe on, and went into the living room, next to the kitchen. My eye caught sight of the fireplace mantle's glass cabinet door, which was ajar. The measuring cup was on the top shelf in the cabinet. I thought my husband was playing some prank on me, but he swore he did not do it. Keys and small items also started to go missing, then turn up right where I left them, and sometimes in places that made no sense. And then there was the toilet paper. We had several cats, one of whom liked to pee on the bath mat. So we religiously kept the door shut. It was a habit, and neither of us ever left it open. It was muscle memory for both of us. But starting around the time we began renovating, every few weeks, sometimes months, I would open the door to the bathroom to find that the toilet paper had been unrolled in a chevron pattern all the way across the floor. Even if it somehow unrolled on its own, there was no way it would be in a pattern all across the bathroom. It was then that we began to suspect that someone was living with us. La Posada, Santa Fe. I made a reservation at La Posada in Santa Fe, so we could go there for a long weekend. It was purportedly haunted, and I wanted to see if anything similar would happen somewhere else. Now this part still blows me away. One day, I came home early from work and flipped on the TV. An episode of Unsolved Mysteries was on, and the hotel I was going to was being featured. The show was at least 10 years old, and it was on a channel I rarely watched. It was about the ghost of La Posada. I was shocked at the coincidence. I was going there that weekend. Right then, my friend calls me and says he just turned on his TV, and it was on Unsolved Mysteries and was showing my hotel room. He had also come home early and did not watch this channel. We were both dumbfounded by the coincidence. When we went on the trip, all was quiet the first night, and I was fine with it, though maybe a little disappointed. We were staying in Julia's room in the main house. The property is quite spread out, and most of the guest rooms are individual casitas built all over the property. My mom and stepdad had met us there, but they were staying in one of the casitas, about 10 minutes away. The main building where we were staying had a restaurant, a bar, and a game room on the first level. Guest rooms were on the second and third levels. The hotel had been a grand home built in the mid-1800s by a wealthy merchant named Joseph Staub. Sadly, his wife, Julia, was mentally ill and really went downhill after the death of one of her children. So she was kept in her room, as it was common to do back then, so the children wouldn't be stigmatized and their chances at a good marriage would be compromised. Her spirit is apparently quite active. On our second night, we were all playing board games and smoking cigars in the game room after dinner. This was directly below Julia's room. A waitress walked by my dad and spilled a drink on him, so my husband said he would go get one of his own shirts for him to change into since my stepdad's casita was a good distance away. My husband left, but then came back less than a minute later. He was very excited, and he told us we had to come to the room. I grabbed a staff member to come with us, just in case. When we walked in, I knew why he was so excited. The room was just reeking of rose perfume. I mean, it was so strong that I had to step out to catch my breath. I asked the staff member if anyone had gone into our room. She said no, they were not allowed to do that unless it was housekeeping, but this was 9 o'clock at night. She then told us, Julia gets upset when people smoke cigars, and this happens when she smells the smoke. We have been taping the room just in case there was any activity, but we saw nothing. Nobody else had entered the room since we had gone downstairs for dinner. Coming home, in the big night. When my husband and I returned from our trip to La Posada, activity in our home ramped up dramatically. Most notably, the unraveled toilet paper prank happened more often. Now, I know you may be thinking that my husband was doing this, and I considered that, but it would have been very difficult to pull off. And he was out of town a lot, and activity happened even then. I should note that we had one bathroom on the first floor. Our bedroom was on the second floor, next to my office. One night, we went out to dinner with some friends on a Sunday evening. We got home at about 10 p.m. We were both pretty tired, so we decided to go straight to bed as it was a school night. I went into the bathroom to brush my teeth and get ready for bed. Nothing was amiss. He got ready for bed too, so we turned off the lights downstairs and went up the stairs. He was right behind me. I ran to the bed and jumped over the footboard. At the exact moment I landed, the TV turned on. It was on some obscure channel that we had not been watching. We had watched SNL the night before. Not only was it on a different channel, but it was playing an old scary movie I remembered watching as a kid, called Don't Look Now. I couldn't believe it was playing. I hadn't seen it in many years, but my husband didn't care about the movie. He wanted to know how I turned the TV on. I said I must have landed on the remote and started looking around myself for it. Then he told me not to bother. He pointed to his nightstand, and there it was, a good 15 feet away from him, and about 6 feet from me. I knew he didn't turn it on because our TV was a PS, and the on-off button, if it was on the box, was well hidden enough that I had never laid eyes on it. There was a plastic flap or cover at the base of it, and I found out later that you had to reach in underneath it to get to the on-off button. Weird, I know, but that's how it was built. I just used the remote and never really thought about it. I asked my husband how he turned it on without the remote. I honestly wanted to know, but he insisted he didn't do it. And because he didn't have the remote and was nowhere near the TV, I believed him. He was visibly shaken. It still had not sunken for me. He didn't turn it on, and I didn't turn it on. It was on a different channel. I could only surmise it must be some electronic malfunction, and I blew it off. He did not. I grabbed the remote and studied it for a few minutes, trying to find a stuck button or some logical explanation. But it looked fine, and I used it to turn off the TV. My husband had terrible PTSD from his days in the army, and he said that someone must be in the house. He decided to do a full sweep and started to head downstairs. Not being a total moron, I told him I would come with him. On our way out of the bedroom, I tossed the remote onto the bed. When we walked into the kitchen, we were shocked. All the lights were on, and all the cabinets were open. He was starting to really freak out. And so was I. I now agreed that someone must be in the house, but remembering the toilet paper incidents, my mind started to think it may be something else. We left the kitchen and went into the living room. The light was on in there too, and the chandelier was swinging wildly. I had never seen anything like it. I went over to it and reached up to stop it from moving. As I reached up, I felt a buzzing sensation in my body, kind of like static electricity. That could have been my nerves, but to this day, it remains the strangest sensation I have ever had. We decided to continue through the house, and he said he was going to check out the basement. We walked down the hall to the basement door, and I told him to hang on because we had walked past the closed bathroom door, and I wanted to see if someone was in there. I cracked open the door, turned on the light, and saw that the toilet paper was once again unrolled in a chevron pattern across the floor. I quickly shut the door. My husband opened the basement door and started to go down the stairs. When he let out a yelp, he quickly did an about-face and came right back up again. He was pale and shaking and said something cold had just gone through his body. He was really upset, and I had never seen him so frightened. We only had one more room to go, so I told him I'd go in by myself. It was our guest bedroom, and it was just a few feet down from the basement door. I reached over to turn the knob, and all of the door hardware fell out. I was left holding a doorknob, staring at the floor where everything else had fallen. I do not know why, but that was probably the most jolting part of it so far for me. How could all the hardware have been loosened just enough to fall when the knob was turned? Someone had to be able to manipulate it just enough to stay on, but also enough that it would fall when the knob was twisted. When the door opened, nothing in the room itself looked off, so we decided to go back to our bedroom to try to calm down and get some sleep. He was behind me as we went back upstairs, and when we walked back into the bedroom, the TV was on again. I know I turned it off, and I know he has not been in the room since we left it. He had been in my line of vision the entire time. Whatever had been done, all the stuff downstairs had been in our room again. I went to the bed to get the remote, but I could not find it anywhere. I scoured that room, looked in drawers, under the bed, pulled the covers off, but found nothing. My husband thought I might have taken it downstairs, so we reluctantly decided to go back down to look for it. I guess we could have just unplugged the TV, but I wanted to know where that remote was. He walked out of the room, and as I was following him, I caught sight of something shiny in the cat litter box. It was a covered box, but the light was hitting something metallic, so I went over and took the cover off. It was the remote control. Yes, my TV remote was buried in the used litter box. After everything else that happened that night, this put me over the top. Someone was clearly having fun scaring us, and they were there right now. And I could not see them. It was less of a fear of ghosts than it was a fear that came about from knowing that I was visible to someone who was not visible. That was it for the night, though, and we went to bed without further incident. Not that I slept a whole lot. Other miscellaneous incidents. Another time, I remember going to my office, also upstairs, and getting this feeling like someone was with me in the room. My husband was on yet another business trip, so I was sure there were no other humans in the house. The house was very quiet, and I just had this strange feeling. On a lark, I said, "If you were able to hear and understand me, please go do the toilet paper thing. I'll give you a few minutes before I go downstairs to check. That will let me know if you are real or if my husband is pranking me." After 5 minutes or so, I went down to check, and you probably know what happened. I opened the door, and the toilet paper was laid out in a chevron pattern across the floor. Again. So now I was alone with an invisible someone. And I knew that whoever this was could understand me and communicate with me. I still have no idea if he or she was there all the time or just popped in for mayhem once in a while. It's not like something happens every day or even every week. But enough happened at that house to change my entire worldview. Other people. I will add to this post that I had a housekeeper come every week, and one time I was outside gardening when she came over. My husband was out of town. About an hour went by, and she ran out, looking panicked. She asked if I had been inside, and I told her I hadn't. When I asked why she wanted to know, she said that she and her sister had been upstairs cleaning the bedroom when they heard the utensil drawer in the kitchen open and slam shut over and over. She thought that someone had broken in, because I am a very chill person, and she didn't think it was me. I then decided to tell her. When I did, she just said, "Oh, that makes sense now." We had wondered if that was what was going on. Apparently, my ghost liked to play pranks on her too. But she was accepting of it and said that in Mexico it wasn't a big deal like it is here in the USA. She still works for me, 20 years later. There is even more to this, but I have already posted a huge one here. If you want to read the rest, my website is ghostability.com. The house that no one wanted to enter. I have posted other stories about my time doing trauma scene cleaning. I was asked to post another story, and while not a typical ghost story in the normal sense, it was something of an oddity. Back then, I managed a crew that went into buildings where homicide, suicide, and other ways people had died or were seriously injured caused a need for our services. We would do our best to sterilize the environment, not just removing biohazards, but making it visually sterilized, so that if anyone walked into the building, it would just look like a construction or remodeling project. This particular call was during a stormy day, dark and gloomy, right out of a scene from any scary movie that you can imagine. Off in the distance, the rumble of thunder, heavy rain, and cold. We get a dispatch call to a home on the hillsides of a neighborhood, a part of a larger city. For privacy reasons, I will not say which city, but this particular area I was not too familiar with. It seemed like a really, really rich neighborhood in an area where you would expect wealthy individuals to live. The dispatch said that a representative was going to meet us on site to release the property to us. I believe the guy we met was an attorney or a real estate broker. He signed the paperwork. We walked inside, and he said anything we needed to dispose of was fine, just keep a record. He gave me his fax number and said just fax the invoice for our services and any paperwork, and his office will take care of anything we need. He handed us the keys and said to just lock the door from inside and mail the keys back when we were done. My crew starts setting up, suiting up, and getting ready to do what needs to be done. I go back out to my truck and start to get ready. We normally used to take 35mm photos of before and after. Prior to this, we used to use those old Polaroid instant cameras, but we switched to 35mm film cameras for quality. We did this not for taking photos of gore but for documentation and to cover our butts, as we had one case where our crew was accused of theft. It turned out not to be true, and the missing item was taken by a family member before we arrived. The house. Well, like I said, it was in a very wealthy neighborhood in the hillsides of a very rich neighborhood. It looked well kept from outside. I remember the driveway being one of those that you can drive in on one side, and it looped around back to the street like a U-shaped driveway, but it swerved as it went up to the house. I'm not sure if you can picture that in your head, but it was a long driveway anyway. It was a very large 3-story home, and since it was on a hillside, you enter the house on the middle level. There was one level down and one level up. Inside, my crew was a little confused. We were used to seeing fresh blood and fresh damage like bullet holes, broken doors, and typical murder scenes. Yes, this house was the scene of a murder. I never got information on who was murdered or how many deaths occurred. The representative of the house didn't state anything. It was strictly business. Sign here, send me an invoice, and that's it. Since he already stated that it was okay to dispose of anything needed and just make inventory, there was really no need to go into details about anything else. My crew eventually enters the master bedroom, and you can tell this is where it happened. The very odd thing was that it wasn't a new crime scene. It probably happened about a decade or more ago. My crew consisted of 3 crew members and myself. 2 of them started getting the creeps almost immediately. They were newer crew members, so it's kind of expected that the new guys get creeped out at scenes. I noticed they did whatever they could to stay out of the house and run back to our trucks in the stormy weather to take trash or get supplies. Having done this job for more than 6 years at this point, I know the scene isn't fresh. The dried blood had almost turned black, but what really stuck out was the age of everything inside the home. It was half emptied. Like most of the furniture that you would expect to be there wasn't in that bedroom. It was like they left it sometime in the late 1970s or early 1980s. I remember thinking about how old everything looked in contrast to the outside. The outside looked like it was kept up very well, but inside there was a layer of dust, and some areas had cobweb webs like you would see in some creepy movie. We noticed that the blood may have leaked to the floor below, so we went to inspect where the blood had pooled up at one time and to see if it went through the downstairs. We located a dark spot in the ceiling below the master bedroom. The room below was like a den/bar area. I told my crew we were going to have to remove all the carpet in the master bedroom and maybe the subfloor, clean the studs, and remove the drywall and insulation in the ceiling below. We also noticed that it had leaked down to the floor in the den below, so we removed a portion of the wood flooring below as well. During our work, a car drove up the driveway and flashed its lights at us. I went out, thinking it might be the representative. I went outside to meet with the car and see what he wanted. I go out and notice it's not the same guy but an older gentleman, probably in his 70s, in a very nice Mercedes. Almost immediately, he starts yelling at me, like, "What the hell are we doing here?" I let him finish and tried my best to explain why we are here. I told him I could show him the dispatch paper and the signature, but if he wanted to call the police, I would wait here with him for them to arrive and check us out. I think that by saying that I put him at ease, he glanced at the paper and said something like, "Why are you here today? Why now?" I can't really go into detail, but just say that we are there to clean up after an accident. He looks at me confused, and he says that the house has been empty for many, many years. I told him well, and we were called out to clean up and remove damages. He looked at me very seriously and said no one has stepped foot in that house in years. I told him, well, maybe it happened years ago, and just now, getting it sorted, I knew he knew what I was saying. He said, "Why now? Why are they finally dealing with this now?" I said I am sorry, I don't have any answers, and I am just there to do what we were told to do. He said sorry for the way he acted towards me and that he lives next door and sometimes has to chase teens away. He just wanted to make sure we weren't there causing trouble. I asked him if he knew the family that lived there, and he said again, and no one has been in that house in years. He did say something terrible happened in there many years ago. It was tragic, and it has been empty ever since. He looked distressed talking to me in the storm and said, "Well, you'd better get back home." Our time in the house wasn't that long, as it didn't take long to do what we were there for. I did one last walk around the house as my crews were back in the trucks, putting things away and removing their protective gear. I took some more pictures with my camera and looked around for curiosity. The whole entire house was eerie, very creepy, like entering a tomb. Some of the lights didn't work, so some of the rooms I entered were dark, empty spaces, and you can see that the carpets, drapes, and remaining furniture that was left behind were old. Not old as in worn out, but old as in old style. I remember seeing some pink dog stuffed animals on the floor next to a lamp. I don't know why that stuffed animal gave me the creeps. We leave the house, and I get back to my office to finish up the paperwork and give everything to our billing gal, including the film roll. We had a service that would come every other day and collect our film for processing. None of those pictures came out. It wasn't empty film. It looked like something tried to process, like blotches, like when back in the day you would accidentally leave film in your checked luggage at the airport and it would ruin the film. It was like that. The photos that were taken were browned out and smudged, so much so that you couldn't make it out. Luckily, we didn't need the photos for billing, but we couldn't explain what happened. Some people say that maybe the storm ruined the film, but we weren't directly near the thunder. It was miles away. We just heard it in the distance. That was the house that no one wanted to enter, and my only guess was that the family had finally decided to sell the property after all the years since the murder. The murder house of a young girl. The following story contains a murder scene of a little girl. I have labeled it NSFW. I have been asked to post more stories from my time working at crime scene cleanup. Back in the 1990s, we did this type of work, and in our area, we were one of only a couple companies with the experience and training to perform such tasks. When people asked me about my job back then, I would say that our job was to clean up nightmares. However, back then, I wouldn't really talk about it too much because it was a hard thing to talk about. We would go in after the investigation is complete and sterilize the scene. Not only for biological hazards but also for visual ones, as if the family came back to the scene, we would make it look as clean as possible with hardly any reminder of what happened. This particular story isn't really a ghost story, but one of those scenes that, in my years of doing this, was really messed up, sad, and tragic. But like so many other scenes, there was, for lack of a better explanation, a heavy sense of evil. This is why I am telling the story, as nothing popped out at us. We didn't see shadows or hear anything out of the ordinary, but it was like walking into a nightmare, and the feeling of overwhelming sadness and dread affected myself and my other crew members. The crew member that went to this scene with me had been with me for a long time. I was the supervisor, and since this wasn't particularly a big scene, it didn't require more crew members to complete the task. The call. If memory serves me right, we had just gotten back to our office, and I was working on paperwork. My crew members were doing chores around the shop, and we were all getting ready to call it a day, so it must have been around 5 p.m. We get a call that was going to dispatch us to a pretty suburban neighborhood about 15 miles from a large city. For family privacy reasons, I will not disclose the city, dates, or names. The crime happened days or a week prior. I forgot how much time had passed, but the investigators had completed going over the scene and gathering evidence, and their job was completed. The house was a pretty normal ranch-style house, probably built in the 1960s. I remember the front of the house having a lot of football decorations, probably from the dad's favorite team. If you passed by this house, there was nothing remarkable about it. It wasn't fancy, and it wasn't unkept. Just a normal suburban family house in a pretty quiet neighborhood. Oftentimes, it happened that I would see a news broadcast and wonder to myself if we would be called out to that murder scene. We mainly performed our services inside buildings. Sometimes we did our services out in front of a house, as sometimes people travel as they are slowly dying and leaving a trail of blood as the person is trying to escape. Well, we would clean that up too. This case was different. The entire house just looked really normal, like when you wake up today and leave your house frozen like that for days or weeks. When we arrived, we were met by what I think was an aunt of the family member who lived there. They had been staying elsewhere since the murder. I did all the necessary paperwork with the aunt, just a form allowing us to enter and do the work and another form that authorized us to dispose of any soiled materials that were of no significant value, as well as the typical contact information and where to invoice for our services. She didn't go into the house with us, but told us which room it was. We never pressured people to enter with us, as most of the time seeing the scene is like reliving the nightmare all over again. We entered the house, removing the crime scene tape, and like I said, it was frozen in time to the night that the murder happened. I remember seeing a laundry basket full of clothes on the sofa, probably just washed, and maybe the mom was going to fold them. Shoes by the front door, dirty dishes on the table, mail on the table, that kind of stuff. We walked down the hallway, and the police have dusted for fingerprints, so you see black smears all over the hallway, and we enter the room. The room was that of a little girl, maybe about 8 to 9 years old. Pink bed sheet on the bed with dried blood, and a white wooden headboard with splatters of blood that have gone past the headboard and splattered on the wall as well. The blood had also dripped from the bed to a small pool on the brown carpet. The police had dusted for fingerprints all along the inside of the room. Most of the concentration of the fingerprint dusting was around the bedroom window. The cleaning up of all the black smudges took longer than the cleaning up of the blood, as I assumed the police removed other things that had blood on them, such as maybe the comforter or blankets, but the mattress held the majority of the blood. So we bagged it and removed it for disposal. We did clean the headboard and the wall. The police also removed a portion of the carpet, maybe for some kind of evidence. So we just cut it out and removed the rest. The entire time we are working in this room, I myself am overcome with such a feeling of sickness. I can't really describe it, but imagine just feeling like you need to leave the area, a mix of heaviness, evil, and sadness that twists you up in your stomach almost to the point of feeling sick, but more of a foreboding, like if something was still lingering there. I didn't get the sense from the rest of the house, but once you entered that room, it was unescapable. I was working on the window ledge, cleaning it up and removing the dusting powder from it. My crew member is putting some trash in our truck, so I am alone in there. I almost get the feeling that something is watching me, but more like something is feeding off of my feelings. So I leave the room to get more cleaning rags, and I find my crew member sitting on the floor in the back of our truck with tears in his eyes. This is a guy who has been with me on some really messed up calls, and as far as the scene being graphic, it wasn't like many of the other calls. I understand and let him be. I ask him if he needs to take more time. Just sit there. I will be inside. I go back into the room, and I am suddenly almost in tears too. I don't know why, but I look around the room, like, really, look at this little girl's room. I see her little clothes, some dolls, schoolwork, drawings she hung on the wall, and on her dresser she had lined up her Polly Pockets. I am suddenly just standing there, almost shaking at that point, not just from being sad about this little girl, but like I described above, a whole mix of stuff. I force myself to continue on, so I finish up cleaning up the room and start on the hallway and outside of the room doorknob, and I see my crew member working inside the house. And he says that he's going to clean the outside of the bedroom window as the investigators had used the dusting on the outside as well. As I put some of our supplies back into the truck, I go around to the outside side of the house and see my crew member standing there at the bedroom window, like in a trance, just staring inside the room. It was almost like he was seeing something but was just silently standing there. I don't want to startle him, so I stand there, just looking at him. After what seems like a couple minutes, I softly say his name, which shakes him out of his trance. He looks at me by just turning his head, and his eyes are bloodshot red, and he just says, "I'm sorry. What did you say?" I just say, "Well, if you're finished up, I will take the final photos, and we can lock it up." He just continues to spray and wipe as nothing. I get our camera and start taking photos of our completed work. You see, we do this as proof of how we left the condition of the home, especially if we are left alone on the property. The crime. Apparently, what happened was that, in the middle of the night, some creeps broke into the little girl's bedroom window. The police think he was looking to kidnap her, but she must have either cried out or fought him off. So he took out a huge Bowie-type knife and stabbed her to death. This all happened as the parents slept in the room next door, and the other kid was all fast asleep. I believe he just walked out of the house and left. Later, as we were driving away, I asked my crew member about him standing at the window outside and if he was okay or needed to go home early. He just turned to me and said, "I put my 2 feet in the same spot the murderer stood just before he killed the girl." He was quiet for the rest of the day and did not talk about the house again. I did passively keep up with the investigation for the next week or so as it was in the news, but eventually I moved on to other scenes and crimes. Sometimes, when someone casually asks in conversation if I am religious, if I believe in spirits, or something similar, I always say I do. Sometimes it's because I have seen the works of evil, and sometimes it's because I want to believe there is a hell and guys like that will be burning for eternity. I was asked to post another story here. This one is about a suicide that happened in a house. Another poster had asked for true ghost stories, which I posted about when I worked in trauma scene cleanup work. I used to manage a crew, and our job was to go in after a homicide, suicide, unattended death, accidental death, or other case that caused a lot of damage due to some type of incident. Sometimes it was very minimal, and other times it was extremely graphic. Most of my stories are about how sad the scene was, or sometimes just crazy, and how some people managed to get themselves killed. I did this work in the 90s, up until shortly after September 11th. We were usually called in after the investigation was over, so the coroner had already removed the bodies. I never really saw the person, but I would see photos in the house and know which one it was. I never really tried to think about it, just the task at hand. I kept my crew very respectful. I never allowed anyone to smoke while on scene or use bad language, and when we were inside, there was no music, and we would almost whisper to each other. It was hard to keep workers in this kind of job. Some, after their first murder scene, left the job and never came back. I never blamed anyone and would not allow a new person to enter a scene, especially if they had never encountered the sights or smells. We all wore PPE, or protective gear. It was disposable, as in some cases you wouldn't want to try to wash it away. Anyway, back to the story. One day we get a call to dispatch to a suicide call. Most of our call-outs we give for some reason would always happen either late in the day or middle of the night. There must not have been much of an investigation into this suicide, as the scene was very fresh. We arrived at a lower middle-class house in a middle-class working-age neighborhood. The neighborhood must have been built in the 1940s or 1950s based on the way the homes looked. My job when we arrive is to get the paperwork sorted before we enter the property. Normally, on most scenes, a public agency such as the fire department, sheriff's department, police, or family representatives have to sign off for us to enter the property and do what we need to do. It isn't uncommon for a family friend or even a neighbor to sign off as a representative due to either the entire household being lost or no one else being available. We just have to have someone with a stated authority sign our paperwork. When we arrive on scene, there is an older, middle-aged woman seated in the garage. You can tell she has been crying, but I sit and talk with her. I usually ask questions like, in the affected room, is there anything of sentimental or monetary value that you would like us to remove and put somewhere safe? Is there anything dangerous left in the room? Usually the PD removes that, but I still ask. I would also ask if there are any soft materials like bedding, curtains, furniture, etc. that you would like us to try and salvage if affected. I have always been told that I am very good at talking to people in that kind of situation, so that is why shortly after I started working in the field, I was promoted to supervisor. This lady that I was talking to, well, she didn't seem distraught because of the death of her son, but she was frightened. She was visibly shaking and kept looking at the front door. My crew was still in our truck, suiting up. I had asked her if she would like to show us the affected area or if we could just enter. She snapped back and said I would never step foot inside that house again, which is understandable due to the fact that her son had just taken his life inside that house. I said, okay, if you can just tell me which room it is. She said it's the first bedroom to the left, just as you enter the hallway. That is when I noticed that she wasn't looking at the front door but the first window to the left of the front door. I motioned and said, is that the bedroom window there? She said yes. She grabbed my hand and said something like, this is going to sound crazy, but there is something evil in that house. I just stood there, letting her talk. I nodded my head, like I was agreeing with her. She said I am never going back in that house ever again. She said you don't understand. Something real evil is inside that house. I told her that I understood, and if there was anyone she wanted us to call for her, she said that a friend was going to be by shortly from another city that was like over an hour away from her and was going to take her away from that house. My crew leader came up, and we told her we were going to get started. We entered the house, and it wasn't much of a bloodbath inside, with a very small pool of blood in front of the bed and a larger pool of blood on the mattress. I also noticed what looked like vomit on the mattress. The thing that really stood out was that the wall was covered in writing. The writing was in blood. The whole house seemed dark and heavy, as all I can describe it. It was messy, not like a hoarder situation, but they obviously didn't keep it up well. As my crew was working on the scene, I went out to talk to the lady, and I wanted to make sure it was okay with her that we bag up the mattress and dispose of it. When I went outside, she was sitting there facing inside the garage, smoking a cigarette. I had asked her if she wanted to salvage the mattress or if we could just dispose of it. She said something like, I wish we could just burn this whole place down." Then she started to tell me about the house. She said it started with her husband. She said that a few years ago he took his own life inside the house in the master bedroom. She said about a year ago her oldest son took his life inside the house. She said she woke up to find him hanging in his room. She said that house is evil. Evil spirits live inside there and attack you. I sat with her and just said, "I am so sorry to hear about all that you've gone through." She said I don't blame them for leaving me. She went on to just say how the demons are attacking anyone who enters. The thing is, she didn't look crazy or talk crazy. She just looked very worn and tired, but mostly scared. Up to this point, I do have to admit that some scenes are just plain evil. You feel it. I can't describe it. But if you could ever feel evil, demons, or bad spirits, whatever you call it, I felt it many times. I felt it inside that house, mostly when I looked at the writing on the wall. The guy who killed himself had drank poison, slashed his throat, then took blood from his cut and wrote on the wall. Now everyone with whom I've shared this story has asked me what was written on the wall. The truth is, I don't know. I couldn't make sense of it. I did make out some words like here, the, little, blue, boy, and some others that I forgot, but they weren't in another language. I guess that as he was bleeding out, he couldn't write them well. The message he left on the wall covered the entire wall. My workers bagged the mattress, cut out the carpet, and cut out the drywall, and they were done so quickly that I was even surprised. They wanted to get the hell out of there too. They hadn't heard what the older lady told me. As I told the lady that we were complete, she still sat there smoking a cigarette, shaking, and just waiting for her friend to arrive. I felt bad leaving her alone, but it wasn't my job or my responsibility to sit and stay with her. My crew talked about how fucked up that scene was. I think the writing had gotten to them. As we pulled away, I shared what the old lady said to me, and one of my crew members, who always wore a cross, said he felt like he wasn't welcomed in there, and he was the one pushing to get the heck out of there fast. I know this isn't a typical ghost story, as we didn't see a ghost, but do I think evil spirits drove all the male members of this family to kill themselves? I don't know. I don't think I want to ever find out. Was this a ghost or something else? Here I am with another story. So far in my 19 years of life, this is my only other experience or encounter. I'm sure there's been small things that happened that I never noticed, per usual, but this gave me and still gives me the most body-wrenching chills to this day. This event took place in my cousin's childhood home about 7 years ago. My aunt and my youngest cousin still live there, but my cousin, who witnessed this with me, has since moved. For the purpose of the story, I will refer to my older cousin as E and my younger cousin as R. It was an early morning in July, and on this day we were packing up to go on a trip to visit other family members in Oregon. This all takes place upstairs, so I will describe the layout. This is an older house built sometime in the 1960s. The upstairs is a very long and narrow hallway. On one end of the hall, there is a bathroom. On the other end of the hall, there's a large bookcase. On the right side of this hall, there are 2 bedrooms, one by the bathroom and one by the bookcase. The bedroom by the bathroom was her room. The other one was a guest room. On the left side of the hall, across from the guest bedroom and next to the bookcase, there was a little door that we could never open. We could also never find the key. My aunt said that she had never seen the key. When we were younger, we liked to pretend to be ghost hunters. On this morning, we were pretending to be ghost hunters per usual. I had a weird interest in this door, and I still don't understand why. However, I was very drawn to it. What's weird is that on this day, there was a very old-looking key sitting on the bookshelf next to this door. I grabbed it and tried to see if it was a fit for the lock, and it was. My cousins were scared to open the door themselves. We all had uneasy feelings. However, being the oldest, I decided I would be the ballsy one and open the door. When I did, nothing was in there. It was just a bunch of insulation and spider webs, and it had no light. It was very disappointing. We put the key back, shut the door, and went downstairs to get a snack. When we went back up, the key was gone, and the door was locked again. Very weird, but as kids, we didn't think much of it. Fast forward, it was about time to go on the trip, and my mother and aunt were outside in the van chatting, so they sent us inside to find E. And I was walking around the house calling out for her, but we couldn't find her. Keep in mind that I was 10 years old at the time, he was 11, and I was 12. I was wearing rainbow leggings, orange Crocs, and a red t-shirt. I had very beautiful, long brown hair that went down her waist. Keep all of this in mind. And I checked ours room. She was not in there. When we walked back out into the hallway, we both saw the exact same thing. We still talk about it today, and every time we talk about it, we both recall the same exact events. When we entered the hallway, we saw a young girl around our age who was wearing a white dress with pink ruffles on the sleeves as well as the bottom. She had on white stockings and little white slip-ons with one strap across the top. All we could see was the back of her. Her hair was beautiful, long, and brown, just like hers hair. She also had a pink ribbon tied in her hair like a half-up style. We didn't think that someone else could be in the house, so when we got into the hallway, he asked, when did you change and where did you get that dress? Once she asked that the being start walking down the hallway to the guest room, we followed her, thinking that it was her acting weird. When we turned into the guest room, no one was there. We even opened the closet, but nothing. After that, we went out the back door, and there was her sitting in the tree house in the very back corner of the yard, still in the same rainbow leggings and red shirt as earlier. We were extremely freaked out and tried telling our mothers what we saw, but they did not believe us. We have never seen it again, but my cousin would always tell me that she would hear weird things in the house that were unexplainable. What are your thoughts? Was this a ghost or something else? Do you think opening the door had anything to do with this weird experience? Additional, this may not mean much, but I also lived in the house for a period of time with them while my mother was in an addiction center when I was 11. While I lived there, I would often wake up in the middle of the night, sleepwalk, sometimes even down the stairs, and sometimes turn in the water. I also experienced horrible anxiety during my stay there. I also had horrible night terrors, as did both of my cousins. Myself and my cousins were always creeped out to go upstairs by ourselves, and we would not go up without another person. At one point, he moved into the guest room upstairs so I wouldn't be up there alone, as there were always weird sounds like banging or knocking upstairs. Now that he is gone, I took the downstairs room. If you enjoyed this video, please be sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe. Also, please consider checking out my Patreon, linked in the description, to get ad-free versions of all Fearful Findings videos, along with exclusive behind-the-scenes content, and the ability to vote on future video ideas. Thanks for the support, thanks for watching, and have a good night.